Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I am super excited to be here today with Mary Ruddick. She is originally from the US, kind of based all over the world. I could never keep up, but currently in Mexico, in Playa del Carmen. And she is here back by popular demand. I don't know if some of you saw, she was on my channel quite some time ago. She is an internationally acclaimed nutritionist. She is the co-founder of the Systems That Heal and Back to Joy project, and just overall a really fascinating and amazing person. And on Mary, your last interview here, a lot of questions came up. We covered a lot, but it seemed to raise just as many questions. So today we're going to do a deep dive on nutrition, and stick around to the end for those of you watching, because she's gonna do her best to answer all of them. So thank you so much, Mary, for doing this again today.
Oh gosh, thank you for having me. It's such an honor. I've just loved what you've put out there for all the patients, for all the people trying to learn about these conditions. So it's really, plus you're so fun.
I am ridiculously excited. I want to pick your brain. I was saying to you before we started recording, I'm like, I'm going to try really hard to keep this not crazy long, because I have 1,000 questions, and I know everybody else did as well. People sent me so many questions. Just as we dive into it, for people who aren't aware, you had your own long, about 13-year intense journey with chronic illness, and you had to learn a ton about health and taking care of yourself, and fully recovered. And for people who haven't seen it, I'll link it here on the screen. I highly recommend checking it out. It's a really inspiring and dramatic health recovery story. Today we're going to just really zero in on the nutrition stuff. But before we do that, I think people will find it really interesting to hear what you've been up to since your last interview, and where you've been doing it and why you've been doing it.
Sure. So since our last interview, I've been on 5 continents studying with indigenous cultures, really going deep into the jungle, into the Arctic, to find more and more communities that are still living in their traditional ways, eating in their traditional ways, and see what their health is like. And across the board, what I've been finding is, although they eat different foods and live in different ways, as long as they're very ancestral, so they haven't adopted vegetable oil or anything outside of their region, right? We don't have to nail down vegetable oil, but just in general, they haven't brought in some of the even like 1 to 2 modern items. Their health is basically perfect. And so I've been trying to learn from them and see what it is, because what my hypothesis has been after experiencing this is that perfect health is our birthright. And what we're all experiencing, this collapse of our collective health, is not normal. And it's not something that we should be experiencing. And there's another way to live, to both prevent and also to get out. But we never want to be in a situation where we have to get out, right? So I'm really trying to learn about how it is that we can still be modern humans, right? We can't exactly go back, but bring some of the wisdom in and honor some of the traditional communities by learning how to actually keep ourselves in vibrant health.
So obviously, processed foods and a lot of the more modern stuff isn't doing us any favors, but have you noticed any trends on like types of food of what people are eating? Is there, more plants, higher fat, or does it vary?
It really varies, but there's always an animal-based nature. So it could be from fish, it could be from the fat, like in some regions that we think of as very plant-based. What I found is that their highest caloric intake is from the fat, and that's often from lard that they're cooking the plant-based food in. And so while they may not be doing a lot of protein, they're getting a lot of animal vitamins from that fat. And so it really, really varies. The one thing that I've seen across the board, though, is that, or I guess I could say what people tend to ask me is, but don't you think it's the lifestyle? And what I've seen is that, of course, lifestyle matters so much. You know that, right? I think our audience knows that. Everybody knows it. I mean, and that is not to downplay it at all. But when we're talking about food, what I see is that if a region, let's say a village, has even brought in 1, 2 foods, but they still live in exactly the same way, you start to see the deterioration of health. It's nowhere near where we are now, but it is where our grandparents or great-grandparents, depending on when you were born, we're starting to see. And so you start to see a susceptibility to infection, which you don't see in the regions I go to that are still living in their traditional way. You start to see some issues in elderly years, but that's about it. And then it kind of declines through the generations as they are continuously modernized.
I'm thinking about the chocolate chip peanut butter cookies I had right before we started this interview. And generally, I do work to eat quite well for the most part, right? As most of us are doing our best. But it's not so easy when I've got, an amazing grocery store on the main floor of my building with just every amazing, not so good for you thing you could think of. So how perfect do you think people need to be when they're making these changes? If they're trying to adopt a more natural approach to their diet, like, is there room for the occasional chocolate peanut butter chip cookie?
I would say it completely depends on the person and how sick they are and how long they've been sick. Each person is going to have a different level to which they have to bring it. I personally had to bring it. I had to go very deep. I couldn't have exceptions. And I tested that for years. Whereas I work with lots of people that don't have to do that. So each person is really unique in that because there's so much about the body that we still don't understand. I more and more I'm seeing that those that come down with these chronic illnesses, they're often just not clearing things well. So they don't naturally detox well, which wears down the body. It stores a lot of fat-soluble toxins in the nervous system. And so it can it can make you more vulnerable to these kinds of things. And so it's going to really depend on someone's ability to detox, on someone's mood, to be perfectly honest, because if we feel joyful despite being in pain, our body can regenerate its cells a lot more easily. So it also comes down to things like how much sunshine we're getting. Right? Because being out in the sun in the morning down regulates our histamines, up regulates our dopamine, our serotonin, gets our melatonin going at night. So there's so many factors that go into it. But what I am not a rigid person. So it was very difficult for me to do that rigid of a diet. And what I always try to inspire people to is be rigid. Right now, you're sick. There's nothing worse than being sick. Yeah. So pull that arrow back, but don't think of it as restriction. It's not forever. Think of it as a gift to yourself, that you are showing yourself how strong you are and how disciplined you are so that you can have a future that other people don't get, right? And so you're shooting your own arrow forward. And when you shoot forward, you have that flexibility. I can eat foods now, I don't have to be rigid. And that's really, I think, everyone's goal. Of course, I think many of us, and I'm sure many of your audience, are in such a hard place. Let's not even sugarcoat it. Miserable place.
They're in hell.
They're in hell. Yeah, it's a living hell. It's beyond that, actually. And so I think a lot of times when you've been in it long enough, you won't care if the only thing you can eat is eyeballs for the rest of your life. You're like, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Sorry, I just had quite the visual of that, of just this plate full of eyeballs. And you're right, I would have absolutely give me the eyeballs.
Exactly.
If it means I get my life back,
it's kind of how I advise thinking about it. Never think of it as something you're going to do long term. It's overwhelming. You'll shoot yourself in the foot. You'll eat the cookie. But when you're well, you can eat the cookie, and your body will always tell you. Right? Yeah. So if there's not an immediate kickback, and if you're not dealing with a chronic issue of any kind, mental, physical, eat the cookie.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And it was similar for me when I was recovering. When I finally at the end got really serious and got well, I had to get very serious about my diet. And I noticed even bringing in little bits of sugar or, alcohol and processed foods, I saw the reaction in my body, and it didn't feel worth it. And I was seeing the progress I was making with my health. So I actually, even though I was really strict with my diet, it didn't feel, like you were saying, restrictive, because when you see yourself getting better, that's all the motivation you need. And I didn't even have to eat eyeballs. I just had to not have ice cream for a while.
Right.
It's really not so bad.
Right.
But then when I came out of it, I thought, I'm never eating ice cream again. This is the way forward. And then,
it changes because you are a product of this environment. And a lot of our emotions are around positive foods from our childhood. So I get excited when I go home to the States. There's so much healthy junk food in the States. I'm often in the bush eating really tough meat you have to chew for 15 minutes. So I get excited to get home to the States. So I would not judge anyone for going down to the grocery store, but it's just all about your goals. I think that's it. What is your priority? And if your priority is really to recover from something significant, if that needs to be your only priority, and it can't be muddled with multiples.
Yeah. So when you made your health recovery, what sort of diet were you eating?
Yeah, so I had tried over 17, but the thing that I ended up eating was just chicken soup that I made. It's a version of the GAPS diet. There's about 100 different versions that you can do of the GAPS diet. So there's many that I wouldn't recommend for the condition that I had, dysautonomia and neuropathy, but kidney disease, everything else. But the version that I did, I just boiled a chicken with carrots and onions and ate ghee. And I ate that around noon. I would have a bowl of soup at noon and then another one around 4 o'clock and then 6 cups of broth in the day. And that was it. And I just ate that every day for 2 years, but it worked.
Not just the broth or the chicken and the vegetables too?
Yeah. That's what I ate. Just the chicken, vegetables, the broth, and ghee.
So for a second, I was thinking it was just the broth. And then I thought, no, I think 2 years you wouldn't be here anymore. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting to know. It is all very confusing with diet for a lot of us, especially people like me. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching who don't travel the world and study this for a living. There's a lot of different diets. There's a lot of conflicting information. And I think sometimes we make assumptions that one diet is like the other when they're actually not. Like I'm thinking of, I had Dr. Sarah Myhill on a channel a while back. And she's amazing. And she's a big advocate of a paleo ketogenic diet. So a lot of us don't even fully understand what that means. So how does that compare to what you were talking about? Is that all the same thing?
It's similar. Paleo diet doesn't restrict starches. So you could have like sweet potato and some other things. Paleo isn't a technical diet, right? So you can have a lot of different definitions of that. So it's a little hard. But I was on a very deep ketogenic diet, plus no starch, and all ancient cooking methods. So the rule for myself, because you try so many things, I think everyone does, you try so many things, the rule that I put on myself was that if there wasn't an ancestral basis, I wasn't going to do it. So I didn't do any protein mixes or energy reading with supplements. I had done that in my earlier years, and not gotten anywhere. And that's not to say that any of you listeners won't try. You never know what's going to work for you. There are 1,000 ways to the peak of the mountain. But yeah, for me, it was very deep ketosis. That was very, very important for my nervous system. For mine, may not be the key for yours, but it was for mine. Dr. Sarah Myhill is amazing, and I love her. In her Orange book, she talks about being close to a cliff, that with your health, you're often right on the edge of a cliff, and maybe you run a marathon or you get an infection, something happens, there's a loss in the family, and you go from seemingly perfectly well to now devastatingly ill, and you can't climb out of that ravine. I think it's such a good example because I think, one of the things that we can do when we're chronically ill, or just even as healthy people who want to stay healthy or who don't want to test if we're healthy or not and just want to keep it safe, is to do as many activities as you can to get yourself away from that cliff. And luckily, we have not just the ancestral traditional things that I've been going around studying, but the science is matching up with that perfectly. And so you've got that going for you. And I think as long as you bring in more and more and more and keep kind of building your life around that, it starts to become a bit of a wheel that starts to spin your health in a different direction.
I'm thinking about people because most of the people, as you know, who watch my channel are facing something like chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, or long COVID, fibromyalgia. I appreciate that you're saying that there is variation in diets and what works for people. And I love that because it does seem to be the case. There are definitely themes. So for people watching, how can they best go about figuring out what they should be eating? Is it by the illness that they're facing or like their body type or where they live or how do people figure this out?
Healthy person, I would go by where you live. I would never go by body type personally. And then you have to look at the priority of the illness. So there's certain illnesses that can be treated in multiple ways and others that there's just some hard-nosed facts. So take chronic fatigue. We know that chronic fatigue, the people are high in lactic acid. We know that they're not usually able to make energy from protein, and that their glucose receptors are a bit broken. And so they're not using energy appropriately from sugar, right? We know that their microbiome is very, very imbalanced. Those studies that came out were so validating for people with chronic fatigue, right? Because for so long it was a waste bucket diagnosis. And that was just cruel, beyond cruel. So So anytime I'm looking at a condition with high lactic acid, like chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm looking at the mitochondria of the cell. I'm going to be looking at your B1 levels. Most diets are depleting B1, and most diets don't have B1. And without that, you can't regulate your lactic acid. You certainly can't make energy from carbohydrates, and you're wasting even more B1 when you do. The B1 that we have in supplements really isn't the one that fixes that. And we don't really eat foods with it. You'd have to eat 2 cups of pork a day. There's just very few foods with it, right? And then we eat so many foods that bind to thiamine and pull it out of the body. So I'd be looking at that. I would be looking at Nissl 1917 bacteria, the probiotic that eats lactic acid. That's usually missing in those people. Taking that is not enough. I would do that 3 months, 6 months into a protocol to already get them. But I would almost always shift them. Okay, I'm going to not use buffer speech. I would personally always go into ketosis with chronic fatigue, and I'll tell you why. Not that it's pleasant. I know everybody gets terrible reactions when they do. I'm not sugarcoating that, at all. It's not going to feel intuitive. The reason is because the protein energy mechanism is broken. The carbohydrate energy mechanism is broken. You can use fats for energy. So these folks usually aren't going to break down fat easily. They're not going to break down anything easily, right? The digestive system isn't working appropriately, but we can eventually get their energy to kick on through that. And it's a slow process. It's a grueling process. You have to be at that place where you're willing to eat eyeballs because it's not pleasant. and you also have to be in the emotional place it could happen in the beginning of the illness or many years in, as it did for me, where you no longer feel afraid when you feel worse, right? When you don't get that terror, when you don't get the panic, like, oh, am I dying today? When that drops, that's when it would be appropriate to transition. So I wouldn't recommend someone do that alone, especially if they have a lot of anxiety or just medical PTSD, which would be very understandable. I would do it through while working with a limbic coach or while working with an advisor or a nutritionist who's schooled in that condition. But the person is not going to want to stick it out. And so they're going to need a cheerleading committee unless they're at the point where they'll eat eyeballs.
Thank you for that. That is one of the best answers I've ever gotten about nutrition, if not the best. And this is why I love talking to and dealing with people who have been through chronic illness themselves, because people just come at it from such a different place and just so much information. Like, we just all have to research so much, even those of us that don't do this for a living. So I very much appreciate all of that you shared. That is truly fascinating. I'm going to have to listen to that section a few times because don't test me on it all. That was really helpful. I'm wondering though, because you did mention supplements, and what do you think about supplements? Are they helpful?
I'm neither here nor there. I usually try to get people to cut them down. There are some that are very helpful. I give, especially when I was doing one-on-one work, I used to give my clients a chart, and you could make your own if you're out there with them, where you put the supplement down and then you record if you get benefit from it, if it's a significant benefit or not, and when the benefit stopped or if you're still getting it, to kind of start weeding it out. So I usually don't recommend people take things just because someone said it's good or they've read it's good. There is an exception. And that would be the fat-soluble thiamine for anyone with chronic fatigue. It's usually going to make you feel worse at first, and you may not even see the effects for 6 months, but then it can be life-changing along with the lifestyle and the diet, because it does help to remyelinate the nerves and actually fix the mitochondrial system that's broken and allow you to make energy. So that would be, there's multiple different forms. There's benfotiamine, there's TTFD, there's a subthiamine, although that's impossible to find. So don't go down that rabbit hole. It's so hard to find. Aside from that, I just have people take supplements based on symptoms. If they're horrifically constipated, or if they have oxalates, we might do magnesium citrate. If they have a lot of diarrhea, we might do calcium citrate, that kind of thing. But overall, I'm not a big supplement person. I'll use them where it's appropriate. My method with supplements is the same as with medication. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I'm a nutritionist. So I can't prescribe or tell someone when to get on or off medication. But a lot of times people will assume that when they come to me, they have to come off their medicine. And I don't believe in that at all. I believe use what you need to as a crutch while you're doing everything you can in your power to get better so that you don't need it in the future. And that's the same way I view supplements, that if you need something, let's make it something short term. It's not going to be, I don't want a medication substitute that you have to be on for the rest of your life. Right. So that's kind of my approach.
You mentioned oxalates. Oxalates, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but there are so many questions came up about that after your last interview. So can you tell us what those are and why we should care about them?
Yes, they are a compound in plants, technically a toxin to all mammals, but humans could traditionally break down about 50 milligrams of them a day. So to give you an example, a cup of spinach has about 750 milligrams of oxalates in it. It varies by the spinach in the season.
And we can break down how much?
50.
50.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And that's only, yes.
I think I had more than that, so much spinach with my breakfast. I'm freaking out here. Okay. Sorry. Keep going. Keep going. Oxalates. I'm full. Yes. I'm like,
the oxalates, they are a toxin and they don't serve any benefit in our body. There are some toxins that can on a small amount. There's something called a hermetic effect where we can actually get a benefit from a toxin. Antioxidants are actually those. Antioxidants are not healthy for us, technically. It's that when they go into the body, they stimulate the immune system, right? And so you can get a benefit from them. But you can also get negative benefits from them. Cancer cells use antioxidants to protect themselves from being seen from the immune system. So it's not so black and white with these things. Back to oxalates though. So to break down 50 milligrams of oxalates a day, you require bacteria that can do so. And very few people have those probiotics in them anymore. And unfortunately, we get those from our mothers. And if they're wiped out by antibiotics, they're gone. We don't currently have probiotics for those. So the best thing to do is moderate your consumption of them. I don't believe you ever have to be afraid of any food. So it's not that you have to shun them ever from going on your fork again. It's really that in traditional cultures and really in many places around the world that are very modernized, people ate seasonally. And so when they would eat the plants, take the spinach, it has a 3-week season. So you have over 11 months of the year to clear out those oxalates from your body. What we've done now is that, especially those of us who were growing up in the late 80s and the 90s, we were really pumping that 5 fruits and vegetables a day. And almost the more affluent you were, the more suburban you were, the more you were doing that. And unfortunately, we were eating a lot of foods year round that are meant to be eaten seasonally. And that means short term, so that they don't build up these toxins in the body that wear down our organs and our systems and can create a lot of havoc.
That is fascinating. I was thinking about when I was sick and I was working on my recovery, one book I read said greens were the answer. And they had you, I was putting a family size pack of spinach into a smoothie every morning. It was just a pureed lawnmower bag clippings. It was so hard to get down, but... And then I'm doing that every single day, and it doesn't sound like I was doing myself any favors.
Well, it's almost the worst part, because the more of the rabbit hole you go into with the plant toxins, I'm personally not someone that's anti-plant at all. I love eating my veggies. I know a lot of people will go zero plant, and that's appropriate too. That's ancestral. A lot of the cultures I go to don't eat plants. You can do either and be healthy. But I think a lot of us very unintentionally end up harming ourselves more when we try to eat healthier, because we end up eating a lot of these foods without the ancestral context of timing and also processing. A lot of the processing methods, almost across the board, everywhere I go, are there to remove those toxins from the food. The oxalates, the solanines, the lectins, the list goes on and on.
So you had mentioned eating a meat-only diet, and I interviewed someone a while back on my channel who had been incredibly sick for decades, and then she switched to a carnivore diet and then was finally well. And I mentioned to you before this interview that my husband for a few months has been doing the carnivore diet, and it freaks me out. And when we moved here to San Francisco, we were both 100% plant-based. So this is a huge 180, but it makes me nervous. We sit down at dinner and he just has like, his plate is just like a steak. That's it, with butter and cheese. And I'm like, you're making me nervous. So are there risks with eating that way, or in what your experience in your research, it seems that like this is a natural way for people to eat? What influences that?
There are many cultures that are fully carnivore. And in fact, some cultures that have been reported as not, when I go to visit, they are. So no, carnivore diet in general is not dangerous. Now we are doing it in a different context. We were raised on a lot of these plant toxins, so our body can be full of those. And we're not usually doing the carnivore diet in the tribal way. I mean, to give you an idea, when I was in Mongolia a couple of months ago,
I feel like there's eyeballs coming up. Sorry.
There were. It's an honor to get the eyeball. Yeah, but no, the brain is passed around. You know, you eat the entire animal in one dish. So the way that it's being done now is pretty much like ribeye, salt, and water. I've seen people recover from incredible disabilities using that. And traditionally, I use that in my practice. And I want to be clear, I didn't get this idea. Dr. Natasha McBride taught it to me. It's an old Russian method for schizophrenia. I used to use it for mental disorders. It's excellent when someone has severe histamine disorders. It brings histamines down faster than anything else I've ever seen. That said, there are other ways to get at histamine disorders. So if you have histamines, like an MCAD, all right, not just the MCAS, but an MCAD, a really significant case, I would prefer someone to go carnivore. But the antihistamine soup with the antihistamine vegetables will work too. So you have options there. The safety of it comes down to what you already have in the body. The times I've seen problems with it, there's two situations I've seen that you can watch out for. One is that the person is loaded with oxalates. And so around days 6 to 7, when you stop eating oxalates, your body gets excited, it starts to dump them, but that can be very overwhelming. It attaches to your electrolytes as they come out of the body. You get more than dizzy. So for some people, they can push through that. For others, especially if they have kidney disorders, a lot of people with dysautonomia or diabetes, they can actually go into an acidic state. And you'll know if you're one of those cases, and this is rare, I want to say. So most people listening to this, when you feel bad during the transition, this is not you. You are fine. But for some people, they'll know if they're in an acidic state because they'll get breathless walking across the room, more so than they do with their illness. And they'll get very, very cold. Their blood sugar will drop down. Quick remedy for that is just to drink some baking soda and water. It alkalinizes the blood very quickly. That's basically what's happening. The pH has been deregulated by the kidneys. So there's that. The other thing I've seen is that typically when someone has hormonal disorders, let's say you have autoimmune condition, let's take MS, but you also have endometriosis. Okay, so you're working on the MS and you go carnivore. Your hormones maybe get better. Most people's will. For a lot of people, if they go low carb or ketogenic or carnivore, the hormones will regulate. That's a long story, and I know you want to keep these short, so I won't go into that as to the biochemistry behind that and what's going on in the body. But for some people, it doesn't matter that they're not overproducing the estrogen anymore or the excess hormones. They're not clearing it through the liver. And there's 2 phases in the liver, really 3 detox phases, but usually phase 2 and 3 are clogged for those people. So if someone is listening and they've been on carnivore for a year and everything is regulated but your hormones, you are one of those people who does not drain the bathtub, so to speak, of the body. And so for you, actually fiber is recommended in a specific form. It's called soluble, not insoluble, not the stuff they kept putting in our food when we were growing up, but the soluble. It's really wonderful as a binder to excess hormones. So you can get that from food. You can get it from carrots, onions, aloe. There's all sorts of foods. Okra is amazing. A lot of the gelatinous foods that kind of have a gooey texture that you see more in traditional cultures than our own, those tend to have the items that will bind to the estrogen and pull it out. A lot of people will do supplements these days like inulin and things like that, but food can usually do the trick.
And if you're doing the carnivore, but not doing it in the ancestral way, like you're not passing around the brain and the eyeballs at dinner, is it still
safe?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally haven't seen any issues with it at all.
Okay.
In fact, I've been really surprised by the lack of issues that I've seen through the years. It used to be that I would only recommend it when I absolutely knew people needed it, but this was long before YouTube and everything else. And now people are just trying it for sport, like they would try to run a marathon. So now I've seen just a ridiculous amount of people do it. I haven't seen harm, but I would say it's never a bad idea to do a couple of things. One would be to get a form of vitamin C. I haven't seen vitamin C deficiencies on it. You have different nutrient needs on different diets, and there's a lot of confusion about that. But I would, the way that we all taught the carnivore diet before quite recently was not rigid. It wasn't anti-plant. It was a no fiber diet. That's what it was. So I always used plants with teas to get things like vitamin C or to bring estrogen down. So we might do green tea to bring estrogen down. We might use hibiscus or elderberry tea or rosehip to get vitamin C. Of course, a cold press, right? Because vitamin C is heat sensitive. Those kinds of things. But we wouldn't do the fiber is what we would avoid.
So this is a lot of information, and thank you. This is a wealth of information. I really can't wait to watch this again and take some notes so I can really properly take it all in. But for people watching, what's a good place to start? Like, what would you recommend for something for them to consider as a starting off place when looking at their diet right now?
I would actually start before the diet. I would start in the mind. Okay. To be perfectly honest, I would really work on being less reactive to everything. So anything that makes you emotionally upset, angry, not to suppress it, notice it, see if you can come back from it quickly, and keep working on coming back quickly. Because I think as long as we're very upset and stressed, it's very difficult to heal. And most people are already stressed before they get sick. So it's skill. It's actually a skill that you learn. I would harness that. And then I would work on your breakfast first. And personally, if cravings were involved, I would go low carb. But I'm not going to give you a specific number for the carbs. I would go lower carbs so that you're not as hungry. Because if you're having a lot of cravings and you're hungry, you're just going to be tortured. And that's no fun. So I would lower the carbs just for your own sanity, because the more you eat, the more you have to eat, the more frequently you need to eat. And the lower you bring them consistently, you have to give it time to kick in. Your body's not going to be reactive with its blood sugar, and you can go very long periods of time without eating, which means when you walk by that bakery, when you think of that memory of a holiday, you're not obsessed about the food part. You're kind of divorced from it in a healthy way. And so I would start there with breakfast being low carb ancestral. It could be soup. Most people don't have energy for making food. So it could be like meat patties, anything lower carb. You can have vegetables with it, but something low carb, because that first meal of the day is what sets your inflammation spike. So if you eat, let's say you have a bowl of mangoes for breakfast, right? It's going to spike your blood sugar, and it's going to be on a mountain and valley peak all day long, most likely, right? Whereas if you had, say, 2 boiled eggs with some carrots and some butter, something like that for breakfast, and you still have that bowl of mangoes, but you have it at 4 o'clock instead, blood sugar is steady. So you're already bringing your inflammation down. You're allowing your immune system to improve, because remember, every time we spike our blood sugar, it can suppress the immune system for 48 hours. And most of us can't afford that.
I have those cookies.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to think that every time I look at the stuff now. 48 hours. Is it worth it?
Yeah, well, now it's so different from when I did this. They're not perfect products by any means, and they're not something I would give to someone who was at the eyeball eating stage. But there are so many ketogenic, low carb, processed foods out there, from pizza to cookies to all of it. They have lots of junky ingredients, but for me, I would overvalue that. I would do that first, just to be able to stabilize, to get out of the insane cravings for food, or just the feeling of dissatisfaction, right? You want to feel satisfied and calm in as many minutes of the day as you can. And so anything that brings you there is going to be helpful for your future journey.
Another big one that comes up a lot that I get asked about a lot, that I read about a lot, I'm sure everyone else does as well, is fasting, whether it be intermittent fasting or juice fasting, or, now Chris Hemsworth has me wanting to do a 4-day water fast. I don't know if you've seen Limitless. Whatever he tells me to do, I do. I think, anyways. So what have you come across in your research, in your work with people around fasting? Is it helpful or necessary?
Sure. I don't think it's necessary to heal, but it's a tool that can be used. And the timing is important because just like exercise, fasting is a stress. It's a healthy stress, but it is a stress. So there's a time and a place for it. When someone is really in the throes of chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, post-viral, any of those things, we don't start with that. We get their blood sugar stable first to where they're not hungry. Then we'll use it. The benefit of intermittent fasting is that you still get all your nutrition for the day, but you get that time for the nervous system and the immune system within the gut lining to regenerate. And you really need that time. But I'm never rigid with it. I'm very flexible with it. And I think it's important. I find it far more important when you're recovering that you do things at a regular time. Because again, we want to bring the stress down to the body, and what the body thinks is stressful is not always what we do. So for instance, eating at random times each day is incredibly stressful for our body, our hormonal system, our enzymatic, and our digestive system. So for me, it's more important that the person eat at exactly the same time every day, like within 5 minutes, and I'm dead serious. Yeah. And then as they start to lose their hunger and they get stronger, that's when we would bring it in. Then it can be very beneficial. I never do the long fasts with my clients, but that's because I've always worked with very, very sick people. Those are great for well people. I do them. I love a 3-day fast. So, but it's infrequent. You do it maybe once a season, something like that. I personally have never done more than 3 days. I never even thought I would do a whole day. I had wasting with my illness. So I had never really been interested in it. I just tried it, maybe 8 years ago to see if I was going to recommend it to clients. And then I felt so good. So it's a tool that can be used. And like so many things, like the spinach, it can be good or bad, depending on how that tool is used.
Yeah. I used fasting, like green juice fasting, I did later in my recovery. I don't know how it would have been when I was, more severe, but when I was in a more mild stage, I could see it. I would feel not so great while doing it, but it was like a step up, like it boosted up my recovery every time I came back feeling better and stronger. But that's just me. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of things. Things to consider.
There's a lot of ways to use the juice. I'll usually have people just do one, like a 4-ounce celery juice, so we don't get too high in oxalates, something like that. But yeah, absolutely short term. They're cleanse is what they are, right? So for especially those with significant histamine disorders, it can be beneficial. I don't tend to use them in my practice, but I do use them. Yeah. And obviously they're beneficial, right? It helps you. It's helped a lot of people. So there's a timing.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense to give your body those breaks to focus on other things. And I still do the intermittent fasting. I'm struggling right now because I have 1,000 more questions to ask you, but I know that I can't keep you here all day. It would be great if you could take just a minute or two to tell us about, what sort of work you do with people, what you have available for people who want to learn more or get in touch with you. How could they do that?
Honestly, and I hate to say this less and less, I'm really working on getting this, the knowledge that I have into the heads of doctors and people seeing all the patients. So I'm working really hard right now on streamlining things, getting them through studies so that it gets into the medical literature and through to the patients. I realized a couple years ago that there's just one of me to go around, and my wait list was always so long, and I felt like people are finding me too late. It's not too late to get better. It's never too late, but just they've been suffering for so long. And I really feel, I'm sure you feel this way too. Ever since getting better, my mission has just been to keep anyone I can from going through this. And if they're going through it, to get them out as fast as possible. So I have a program called Rebels in Training, because you have to rebel to heal. And it has a whole like hero's journey. And it's specifically for nervous system disorders. So I'm really streamlining that. And then I have a practitioner program, but I have that on pause right now while I really streamline the Rebels program. It's been going for 2 years. So it's not that. I'm streamlining it so that I can bring studies into it and get that into the literature. So I do have that one thing available. I used to be so reachable and now much less, because I've realized that it's now become such an endemic that more people need to know how to get better. And there's no reason why people can't do this at home on their own if they're disciplined enough and if they feel safe enough, because it's really different groceries. In fact, this is what I'll leave you with actually. I'm here in the Yucatan studying with the Toltecs and the Mayans, and I was taken to some of the old ruins, and a lot of the imagery that's carved into the pyramids and into the temples was explained to me, and it blew my mind. It really blew my mind. But this one in particular is of a warrior, and you'll see it if you ever travel around this region, whose head has been cut off, and there's 7 snakes coming out of the head. You would think this would be a sacrifice, right? Oh, we killed the enemy. No. This is a story of transformation, of how to become a new person. That if you have to surmount something seemingly impossible, and yeah, I'm talking to all you guys out there, right, with this illness, if you have to surmount something truly impossible, you have to cut off all 7 of your identities: the way you think, the way you act, the way you eat, who you surround yourself with. Every single thing you have to be willing to sacrifice in order to get that new head, that new body. And so that's what I would go forward with. I'm still doing my podcasts and research. And then as soon as I've got this stuff out there, I'll be back in doing more client work. I miss it. I love doing client work. I just really wanted to get this into a package nugget for more people to use.
That was such a perfect way to explain it. I had goosebumps. I've never heard it explained that way. I think that's perfect. Thank you for that. And I've been thinking this whole time, how do we clone you? How do we clone you? But thank you. Thank you for all that you do. I can't even begin to imagine the ripple effect that you're having in the world and how many people are benefiting from all that you've learned and all that you're doing and all that you're sharing, Mary. So thank you so much for all of this, for your time, for speaking with my viewers today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, same. And thank you. I'm so grateful you have this platform. I'm so grateful that the patients have somewhere to go where they can learn. YouTube is a true university, and it wouldn't be if it wasn't for you. So I'm so grateful that you have this platform and that you're so generous with your time. I think that's really something to highlight about you, because you've lost so much of your life from illness, and look at how you're using your time. You're using your time to help other people solve their problems. And I think that speaks so highly of your character and of your heart. So thank you for having me on. I'm just very grateful to be.
Oh, thank you. Very nice to hear and very, very kind of you to say. And thank you to all of you watching. As always, I really enjoy your comments and all the friendships that I've made with so many of you around the world. I look forward to hearing what you have to share about this interview, what questions you have, your own experience. Please share it. And if you're interested, I've got many more interviews like this on the channel. I'll link Mary's in the video description from her first time she was on. A lot of great stuff there as well, plus many other expert interviews bringing you hopefully what is helpful information on your healing journey. So thank you again, Mary. Thank you again to all of you. Big hugs to all of you. Whatever you're facing, keep going, keep at it. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in the next video.